Привет, Tovarishi, and welcome to the next part of Temujin's journey. This has been quite a long time in coming, and I'm very excited to present it to everyone. It's going to be another one of our narrative editions, and before we begin our tale, I just want to preface it with a couple things. First off is that I released a kind of silly meme video. Basically, the whole point of that video was just to show the battle where I took over this camp here. This used to be a Reaver camp. It got taken over by a faction called the Southern Hivers. Unfortunately, they cannot be recruited to your side. They are hostile to you no matter what, so they had to be wiped out. And in addition to that, I also want to talk about another mod that I've added to the game, and that is the Conquest mod, which allows you to take over various outposts that you've conquered in the game and actually use them. They become part of your territory, they become part of your own faction, and you can control them, you can do whatever you want with them. And that mod has been integral to a specific part in this story, and you will come to know that part very shortly. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to mention that we have begun naming some of our characters after members of the Comrade Discord server. So if you'd like to have a character named after yourself featured in the series, come on over to the Discord server and ask for it. That's pretty much all you have to do. And I'll be happy to oblige, as there is plenty of room left in the Horde. At this point, we have a grand total of only 61 members out of 256. So there's a lot of room to grow. And with that, I hope you will enjoy the next segment of Temujin's journey, which I'm calling Death and Taxes. In the time since the Battle of Ark and securing the Reaver camp from the Southern Hivers, Temujin and his Golden Horde enjoyed an era of untold prosperity up until this point. Finally, with the destruction of the Reavers, the Golden City was now free of their raids. For now, only the skeleton bandits and wildlife remained as the entities possible of attacking the city. And by this time, the Horde was well versed in handling those threats. With their newly found breathing space, the Horde began to solidify their position. Temujin ordered the rebuilding of the Golden City's walls. Through this construction, the Golden Horde would create what would become to be known in the world of Kenshi as the Corridor. No other city featured anything like the Corridor, a long and narrow gap between two tall sets of walls that were littered with turrets and crossbows pointed down at unsuspecting travelers as they entered the first door of the corridor until they exited into the safety of the city. Thus far, the corridor has defended the Golden City against all invaders, and Temujin has been very satisfied with how it has performed. Not only that, Temujin used his downtime to explore his surroundings further. During this exploration, he would find the capital of the anti-slavers, Spring, high up in the mountains. The anti-slavers were a faction of former slaves and sympathizers, led by the legendary skeleton, Tin Fist, whose express goal was to eliminate slavery from the continent. The anti-slavers fought unarmed, as according to Tin Fist, fists are the perfect weapon for a slave. You can never be disarmed. You can even fight while naked and in chains. Tin Fist himself was without a doubt the most powerful martial artist in the known world, and could even put Genniskun to shame with ease. The Golden Horde would also find the skeletons of the Black Desert City. These antisocial skeletons didn't have much to say to the Golden Horde, but they certainly had much to sell it, as these skeletons were avid collectors of unique research artifacts. The Golden Horde made liberal use of these artifacts to greatly enhance their technological capabilities. The Golden Horde also expanded its own ranks, recruiting approximately 20 new members into the Horde. These new recruits swelled the Horde's military capabilities, as well as their economic capabilities, as the Golden City produced numerous goods, which were all sold for an exceptional profit. Weapons and armor were the #1 export of the Horde, followed by alcohol, excess crafting material, and excess food. Temujin had also ordered the Horde's military be organized into effective units. These units would be known as R-bands, each consisting of either 10 heavy or light troops. Over the course of various battles, Temujin had learned it was in his best interest not to integrate heavy and light troops together, as their battle purposes were vastly different. At this point, the Golden Horde could field 4 R-bands, 2 heavy and 2 light. The first heavy R-band was commanded by Temujin himself, the first light by Genus-kun. The second heavy was commanded by Leaf, and the second light was commanded by none other than Chad. This period of respite was a breath of fresh air for the Horde, who was so used to scraping by the skin of their teeth. Now they had had the time to grow, and grow they did. In a remarkably short period of time, Temujin had transformed the Horde from a ragtag band of misfits into a real civilization. And as such, it was during this time that Temujin would make one of his most famous decrees, the Decree of Citizenship. Temujin decreed that anyone who swore allegiance to the Horde and promised to always uphold the best interests of the Horde and its Khan would become a citizen. When you became a citizen, your life was protected by the Khan, and collectively by your brothers and sisters. When you became a citizen, you would always have food to eat. When you became a citizen, if you wanted to fight, you were given a bow and a sword, and training to do so. All that was asked in return was that whatever the Khan needed of you, you did. And it was through his word that your citizenship could be revoked and the protections thereof. Unfortunately for the Horde, all good things must come to an end, and so too with this peace and prosperity. It ended when the Horde would try and solve one of its most pressing issues, trade. For you see, the Golden Horde was far and away the region's best producer of weapons and armor. However, they had trouble selling them. Their willing allies, the Crab Raiders, would always buy goods from the Horde. However, their economy was hardly robust, and the closest village only had so much money. The Horde then built a shop in order to sell their goods. However, their location did not exactly prove enticing to travelers, and their well-stocked shelves remained full for lack of buyers. The Horde did trade with Black Scratch. However, the hills between the Golden City and Black Scratch proved favorable terrain for bandits and unfavorable terrain for trade caravans, and therefore trade was somewhat limited. Temujin devised a plan to remedy this. With the destruction of the southern Hivers, there was a clear and easily accessible path of terrain between the Golden City and the village that was once inhabited by the cultists. Temujin decided that he would make use of this village, and for the Golden Horde, it would turn a camp on the edge of civilization into a trading post. From the village, trade with Black Scratch would be easy. In addition, traders from multiple regions were known to trade in the Storm Gap coast, and Temujin had hoped that the village would receive trade caravans. Temujin's hope was correct, and he ordered the second light R-band to inhabit and defend the village. Traders soon started to show up. The village proved to be a great boon for the Horde. Temujin intended to make the village a permanent fixture for the Horde and rename the village Camp Lars, in honor of Lars, the hero who gave his life for the Horde at the Battle of Ark. The camp also provided easy access for trade to the Horde. Given its location, Camp Lars soon turned into a supply depot and distribution hub for the Horde, as Garus could easily and safely travel from the Golden City to Camp Lars. As well, new recruits gathered at Camp Lars, waiting to be escorted to the Golden City for their permanent assignments. Temujin could not be more pleased with how the Horde was progressing. During this time, he was drawing up plans to strike out and destroy the Skeleton Bandits, the only other gang in the pits capable of threatening the Golden Horde. However, everything changed when the Empire attacked. Proverbially. The incident would go down in the annals of Kenshi history, as after it, the world would never be the same. While guarding Camp Lards, Chad noticed a small Empire party of samurai approaching the camp, demanding to speak with the leader. As Chad was the commander of the 2nd Arban, charged with defending the camp, that meant leadership fell to him. He opened the gate and approached the Empire party to see what they wanted. "Your taxes are due to the Empire immediately, and we are here to collect them," the young samurai sergeant told Chad. Chad laughed. "Why do we owe you any taxes? This village belongs to the Golden Horde, taken through right of conquest." The sergeant looked at Chad, frustrated. "You owe the Empire taxes because you own an outpost on Empire land. You are defended by the resources of the Empire, and therefore must pay for them." "I don't think you're going to find what you're looking for here," Chad said, as he flashed a ferocious smile at the sergeant. The sergeant scowled back. "You know, refusing to pay taxes is a crime against the Empire." "Your laws mean nothing to me," Chad laughed again. "Tax evasion will not be permitted, and soon you will see what happens to tax dodgers." The sergeant signaled, and his samurai stood at attention and turned to leave behind him. Chad's thoughts had long since turned to cavorting with the opposite sex. He paused and shook his head. "Now is not the time for chasing women," he thought. "Temujin said that he would revoke my command if I spent too much time on romantic exploits." Chad quickly relayed what had happened to Temujin at the Golden City. Temujin was initially furious. "How dare they demand a single cent from me, after I helped them defend their outposts, after they left Zip to bleed to death, after we removed that cult plaguing their land and once again opened up Eastern trade. And after all this, they have the audacity to demand anything from the Horde. The village was never even theirs in the first place, as far as I could see. Where does the Empire get off demanding taxes for it?" After Temujin had calmed down, he knew that it would need to devise a plan, and devise one quickly. Thankfully, Temujin had prepared plans for his invasion of the Empire. Rather than waiting around for the Empire to strike at Camp Lars, he would temporarily abandon the camp and strike out against the Empire before they could hit first. His justification? Total world domination. Temujin decreed that he was the rightful ruler of the continent, a continent full of broken people and immeasurable cruelty. The only way to bring back order and end the suffering would be to submit to his leadership. He declared that all other leaders had lost their right to rule, as a consequence of the suffering they had inflicted on their people. They had had their chance, and now it was Temujin's turn to lead the world into a golden age. To facilitate this mission, all other factions would have to pay tribute to the Horde, or submit to its control. Elsewise, they would find out just how potent the wrath of the Khan was. With his decree given, Temujin gathered together his army for a first strike against the Empire. Temujin mustered the 1st and 2nd Light Arbans, as well as the 1st Heavy Arban at Camp Lars, while the 2nd Heavy Arban would remain in the Golden City to defend against counterattacks. Temujin had long since known the first place he would strike when war with the Empire became a reality: the slave market of Eye Socket. The market had both strategic and sentimental value. The Empire had used Eye Socket as a staging ground for the swaths of slaves they would capture from the south and eventually ship north. In addition, they would ship resources from the Empire to Brink from Eye Socket. Destroying the market would cripple the Empire's economy and leave the city of Brink vulnerable to a siege. The sentimental value came from the promise he had vowed to fulfill, Zip's promise to Ray when he recruited him into the Golden Horde, that Ray would get his revenge. Temujin would take special care that during the attack, Ray would get the vengeance he sought. Temujin hoped this would raise the already high level of morale in the Horde to impetuous levels. Temujin then deployed his army in front of Eye Socket, but far enough away that their turrets could not target them. He then formed up his army with the first heavy R-band in the center and the first and second light on the wings. He ordered one of his new recruits, a skeleton that was found by the Horde, and reset into their service, Sly Desert Fox, to get his crossbow and snipe at the slavers on the turrets defending the walls. The conniving and delicious skeleton nodded in agreement. Sly Desert Fox was a sniper bot in his past life, meaning that he was unquestionably the most skilled shot in the Horde. He was immediately promoted into the Golden Eagles and issued one of their sophisticated Eagle Cross crossbows, and with this, his accuracy was remarkable. Sly Desert Fox took aim and fired. He hit his target, but did not kill it. The slavers immediately noticed something was up. They raised the alarm and mustered a force of slaver guards and samurai to the front gates, and he immediately saw Temujin's army drawn up on the outside. "There they are!" one of the slavers shouted. "They're those slave lovers that just attacked us!" And they began to charge at the Golden Horde formation. In response, Temujin just said one thing: fire. And the Golden Horde unleashed a withering barrage at the charging Empire forces. The volleys of the Golden Horde proved too much for the slavers, and most of them fell before they were able to make contact with Temujin's lines. And those that did were so badly injured that they were quickly cut down by the skilled swordsmen of the Horde. With the first wave beaten, Temujin ordered all of his eagles with him, not just Sly Desert Fox, to fire indiscriminately at the enemy and draw as many of them as they could into our lines as possible. The eagles took up their positions and began to snipe at as many guards as they could. Once again, the Empire gathered together for another attack. This time they were more successful, but ultimately could still not break Temujin's lines. Temujin was pleased with the battle's progress. The Horde had foresaw a long battle and thought to bring a resupply gyro, full of additional ammo and food. With this, the Horde would always be supplied and be able to continually wear down the energy of the defenders. The Battle of Eye Socket continued in this fashion for hours. Eventually, the slavers were getting frustrated, not able to make any ground against the Horde, and in turn suffered massive losses. The slavers pulled back into the camp to take shelter. At this point, they barely had enough forces to man the wall turrets, and it was time to move to the next stage of the battle. Temujin gathered his forces and charged through the front gates of Eye Socket, and what ensued was a bloody and desperate struggle as the slavers tried to hold back the Horde's fury. But their weakened and battered forces proved unable to complete the task. It looked like it would be a surprisingly easy victory for the Horde. That was until the elite samurai guard appeared on the field. Charged with defending nobles and other higher-ups in the Empire, these warriors were the best of the best that the Empire could muster. These strong-willed men and women attacked the Horde relentlessly, their thick armor absorbing most of the crossbow fire easily. Once in contact with the Horde, there were very few members of the Golden Horde that could stand toe-to-toe with these warriors, and they would only be defeated after enough bolts had ripped through their armors, where they bled to unconsciousness. With the battle raging, it became clear to Temujin that the Horde would eventually be victorious, so he gave the word to Rei. It was time at long last to seek his revenge. Since joining the Horde, Rei had become one of its most fearless fighters, as well as one of its most tough fighters. This restlessness had cost Rei greatly, as now, in addition to having no tongue, he had lost both his arms and legs to battle. Now more machine than Hiver, Temujin had kept one promise at least, to make him strong, though not in the manner he had expected. And now it was time for him to fulfill the other promise. Rei strode into the bar where he was sold. It was remarkably calm. However, as soon as the bar guards saw Rei, they attacked. They were easily dispatched though, and Rei combed the bar looking for his former master. After some time, he found her in the back of the bar sitting calmly. You she stammered. Ray didn't say anything, for he could not say anything. He just stared at her with his dead black eyes, and then began rubbing his middle fingers against each other, creating an awful screeching sound, like nails on a chalkboard. A trick he had learned during a raid one time to intimidate his targets. I knew my time would come eventually. I just hardly expected it would be you who gave me that ticket off this world. She laughed bitterly, and downed the drink in front of her. Ray said nothing. He just continued to rub his fingers together. No matter, she said, standing up. At least I will die on my feet, having never been a slave. They will never be able to say that of you. She spat on the floor. Let's get this over with. Ray happily obliged. Drawing his hacker, he walked towards her and with one clean strike, left a deep gash across his former master's stomach. She cried out in pain and collapsed to the floor as her blood and organs spilled out. Ray was not as happy as he thought he would be. It was too good a death for her, he thought. He wanted to make her suffer more, so he picked her up and took his now unconscious former master outside. He brought her out looking for medical attention to save her. Ray wanted her to live and continue to pay. Unfortunately for him, though, the battle was not yet over, and no medics in the Golden Horde would be able to take the time out of their tasks to assist him. Dejected, he took his former master back and threw her body into one of the cages in eye socket. At least you will die in a cage, Ray thought, as the last remaining life from the master flowed out. Speaking of cages, Temujin had hoped he could make use of the former slaves in eye socket to his advantage. He turned to the sly desert fox, the only Horde member capable of reliably picking locks, and ordered him to free as many slaves as he could. He obliged, and went to every cage in the city and freed every single slave. Unfortunately for Temujin, the majority of the slaves were so fearful of their masters that they would not even leave their cage once they were freed, opting to stay put. However, there were former slaves willing to risk their lives. Once someone freed them, they would grab weapons off their dead masters and continue the fight. Now with all the slaves free, Ray's revenge complete, Temujin needed to do one last thing before he could pull his forces out. Capture or kill the slave master of Eye Socket. The Horde found him in the watchtower, defended by the last remaining elite samurai guards. At this point, the Horde could overwhelm these fighters and quickly down them, and captured the slave master. Temujin chuckled when they told him what they found on his body. A brick of fine hash, an illegal drug in the Empire. Rules for thee, but not for me. With the slave master captured, Temujin gathered together his forces and left Eye Socket before the Empire could send reinforcements. The smell of blood and fire still thick in the air. Temujin looked back at Eye Socket one last time to see the chaos he had caused. The camp was destroyed, the slaves freed, its leader captured. It was a total victory, and amazingly for the Horde, they had not suffered a single casualty. The second light Arban was severely injured, but with enough time, everyone would recover. In addition, Sky Skull and Lumi both lost limbs in the battle, but those could be replaced. The major disappointment is that after the battle, of the slaves who fought alongside the Horde, none chose to join it when offered citizenship, opting instead to forge their own path in the world. Temujin was displeased to hear this, but he could not begrudge their choices. With the first stage of the attack finished, Temujin would move quickly into the next stage, a simultaneous raid on Brink with an attack in force on the nearby farming village. Knowing that it wouldn't be possible to take Brink currently, Temujin still wanted to cause as much chaos as possible, so he ordered Sly Desert Fox to go on another mission. Temujin knew that nobles would patrol the area around Brink. Temujin wanted to send a message to the Empire, a message that not even their nobles would be safe from his wrath. Temujin ordered the stealthy skeleton to find a good spot, lie in wait for a noble, and at the most opportune moment, Sly was to take his shot and assassinate the noble, then retreat back into the safety of the Horde. In the meantime, though, the Horde would need to take a brief moment to regroup. With a second light Arbaan significantly injured, Temujin didn't have much choice. He would use this time to take his new prize back to the Golden City, his newly captured slave master. As he was paraded through the corridor, the members of the garrison laughed and jeered at the master from on top of their turrets, as most of them used to be former slaves or exiles themselves. The garrison was a new institution that Temujin had created. Commanded by Starefast, the captain of the garrison was in command of both defense and production aspects of the city. Due to this burden, the captain of the garrison was never permitted to leave the Golden City for any reason. This made Starefast the perfect Hiver for the job, a skilled warrior in his own right, but also a brilliant agriculturalist. His leadership has ensured the city has never fallen, but also there has always been a surplus of food. When a new member joined the Horde, they would automatically be assigned to the garrison. During their time in the garrison, they would receive their standard issue equipment and training. Once trained, they would be assigned to defend the walls, protecting the city from various raiders and animals. Once a member of the garrison had proved themselves through defending the city, they would be eligible for reassignment to an Arbaan and become a fully fledged member of the army. Once his parade through the corridor was done, the slave master was placed in a cage in the Thunderdome. He screamed and cursed, "You'll regret this! When they come for me, you'll regret this!" Hardly being used to this type of treatment, the master was obviously indignant. However, the Horde was more than happy to let him get used to this type of treatment. With enough time passing, Temujin was ready to execute the last stage of his initial attack. He gathered his forces once again and made the march out of Camp Lars. Thankfully, though, it was only a short march to the farming village. In the meantime, Sly Desert Fox had placed himself on a small hill overlooking the outskirts of Brink, waiting for his moment to strike. The moment came when a noble hunter and his entourage turned the corner and started walking up a hill in front of him. Knowing he had the opportune moment to strike, the crafty, creamy canine skeleton took aim and fired a bolt. He hit his target but did not kill it. The long bolt ripped through the arm of the noble. He cried out in pain as his guards scrambled to find the attacker. It didn't take them long to see the skeleton on the hill and charge towards him. However, it was too late, as the skeleton had already loaded another bolt into his crossbow, took aim, and fired. Another hit. This time the bolt pierced the noble's leg, and he immediately fell to unconsciousness due to pain and blood loss. Sly quickly came up with a plan. He juked his samurai guards, charging up the hill, taking only minor damage. When he ran down, he captured the noble right from underneath the guards' noses. Then, the skeleton ran as fast as his metal legs could carry him, the noble guards chasing him as fast as they could. But the heavy armor of the guards prevented them from catching Sly, and he took his prize back to the Golden City. Simultaneously, Temujin was forming up his forces in front of the farming village. This was not expected to be a difficult battle. While the defenses of the village were strong, the garrison was small and barely had enough manpower to keep them functional. Temujin could easily place his Arbaans outside of the range of the turrets and snipe at the samurais until they were forced out into the plains, leaving them vulnerable to withering crossbow fire. This is exactly what happened. At one point, a horde of grass pirates appeared. Temujin considered them to be a waste of bolts, and they were easily mowed down. Once the garrison was weakened, the horde advanced into the village and massacred nearly everyone, in a move that would surely be used as propaganda against him. Temujin did not control his forces well, and they proceeded to massacre the Empire peasants in the village. The weak peasants could do nothing against the horde warriors, and they were massacred by the dozens. With the initial attack a roaring success, Temujin withdrew back to Camp Lars. With eye socket destroyed, the Empire could not adequately protect Brink. The major city would be the next target on the Khan's list. In addition, it would hinder their supply of new slaves. Taking out the farming village would make it very difficult for the Empire to attack Camp Lars, and impossible for them to attack the Golden City. Plus, the capture of a slave master and a noble must instill absolute panic in the Empire. Temujin wished he could have seen the Emperor's face when his messengers reported the absolute disaster to him. Not only were his collectors unable to collect any taxes from the Horde, they were now at war with them, in a move that would surround the Empire with enemies at all sides. His slave markets destroyed, farms burned, and one of his major cities facing a siege. The Emperor must be fuming. However, this was no time for Temujin to rest. He knew the Empire would strike back, and before they did, he would need to gather allies in this war. The first ally Temujin would approach would be a ghost, a myth, a man whose name people whispered in hushed tones. The legendary Tin Fist, leader of the anti-slavers. Temujin had already approached Tin Fist about an alliance earlier, but Tin Fist turned him down, stating that he couldn't trust the Horde until they had proved themselves as allies to his cause. Well, after this incident, Temujin felt confident Tin Fist would ally with the Horde. Now that Skip and Zip had moved into more leadership roles, Slick had replaced them as the premier scout and messenger for the Horde. Giving both his legs to the Horde in combat, Temujin opened up the treasury and purchased 2 of the finest scouting legs money could buy. With these, Slick could travel a mind-bending 54 miles per hour, making him faster than just about anything in the Kenshi world. Temujin sent him to Spring to finalize the terms of an alliance. Thankfully for the Horde, word of the attack on Eye Socket had spread fast. Temujin believed that some of the slaves from Eye Socket had joined the anti-slavers and relayed the message to Tin Fist. The mood in Spring was elation. The Empire hadn't been dealt such a blow in years. Slick and Tin Fist's right-hand man, Gray, quickly agreed to terms, and the Horde had gained another ally. With the alliance between the Golden Horde and the anti-slavers finalized, there was one more area the Horde could go looking for allies, among the rebel farmers desperately fighting to overthrow the Empire. Temujin knew that the farmers had a base of operations somewhere in the mountains outside of the Empire's control, but was unsure as to where. Temujin sent Slick to scour the mountains for their base. Thankfully, it did not take long for Slick to find them. The rebel base was small, smaller than could fit their numbers. The rebels also looked sickly and fearful, nothing like the poised and confident anti-slavers. One of them asked Slick if he could spare any food as he passed by. Sadly, Slick had nothing to give out. Slick found the rebel leader, Boss Simon was his name, and offered an alliance to them on behalf of the Golden Horde and anti-slavers. Boss Simon was bitter, remarking upon how the anti-slavers had left him and his forces in the dust upon multiple occasions. Ultimately, though, he understood he wasn't in a position to decline, and joined the Allied coalition. With that, Temujin had believed he had set himself up excellently for the coming war. Not only had he delivered the crushing first blow, he had cobbled together a ragtag coalition, ready to take on the world's most powerful faction. Now before him lay the next goal, the Siege of Brink, the first major city the Horde would lay siege to. Fortunately, Temujin had a plan to break the city, a plan that was already underway.